Before leaving a berth or mooring, it's important that the boat and crew are prepared for sea. Many skippers use a checklist to help them, to ensure that they don't forget anything. These are some of the things that you might wish to consider. Check all safety equipment, including your offshore flare kit. Inside it, you should have parachute flares, handheld reds, and orange smoke flares. You may also use this container to hold your anti-collision flares. These are white handhelds. All flares have expiry dates, so it's important that you check to make sure that your flares are in date. Make sure that you are familiar with the flare operation of the type of flares that you have on board. The operating methods vary between the differing types of flares. It is a good idea to have a pair of gloves inside your flare kit, as when you're using handheld flares, they burn extremely hot. You should check your life jacket. Make sure that the cylinder hasn't been fired and it is in good condition. You should have harness lines available for all of those on board.
Now attached. Lovely.
It's advisable to have a first aid kit available. Other equipment that we should have on board should include bolt coppers, spare water and fuel, emergency tiller, anchor ball, a handheld radio, GPS and an EPIRB. It's also advisable to carry a grab bag which contains a number of items. Check your fire extinguishers at least once a month. With dry powders, it's a good idea to turn them upside down. This prevents the powder inside becoming caked. Switch on your batteries. Check all your instruments before you go to sea. Make sure your plotter or GPS are turned on. It is advisable to carry out a radio check on your VHF radio. You should not do this on channel 16, as it is a channel used for distress and calling only. Radio checks are best carried out with another vessel or with the marina. Check that your depth instruments and log and wind and speed are all operating correctly. You should check that your deck instruments are also operating correctly, so that you have depth and speed and ideally wind available on deck. Check your nav lights. So you should check your bicolour or side lights if you have them, tricolour, anchor light,
And off. Off.
and don't forget your stern light. If you have a deck light, this should also be checked, as it might be useful if you're carrying out manoeuvres at night when people are working on the foredeck. You should carry out engine checks. Basic engine checks include checking the oil, checking coolant levels, and checking the tension of the drive belt. Look under the engine for telltale signs of problems. If you have oil or coolant below the engine, then you have a leak somewhere. If your sails are not permanently fitted, you will need to hank on your sails. For those that are already attached, you will need to remove sail covers. Ensure that your halyard is attached before slipping lines, in case you need to raise your sail in an emergency. Close any hatches before you go to sea. Don't forget the small ones that are located into the cockpit. Hatches should not be locked whilst at sea in case you need access to them in an emergency. Ensure that your passage is planned before you go to sea and that your crew are aware of what you are going to do. Prepare a passage plan so you have a safe exit from the harbour. Have the relevant charts available and make sure that they are up to date. Ensure that you have an almanac, a pilot book and logbooks ready. Ensure that your boat is provisioned for your trip. It may just be a simple day sail, in which case you may just want to have a cup of tea, maybe some biscuits. But always ensure that you have something on board. You may be out longer than you think. Stow away any food and make sure that it is looked after carefully. Stow away any other gear so that the area is tidy and nothing will fall when the boat heels over. Remove any unwanted rubbish and dispose of responsibly. Recycle where possible. Ensure that you get a reliable weather forecast. Maybe you can get it from the internet before you travel to your boat, or maybe from the marine office, VHF radio, or perhaps from Navtex. Check your fuel levels before you go. You should have enough fuel to motor your entire trip, plus a 20% reserve. This is good practice. Check that you have sufficient gas for your trip. Ideally, you should carry a spare, but it should be stored in a locker that drains overboard. Ensure that your water tanks are filled up, but make sure you flush the hose before you fill. You don't know what might be in there. When filling your water tank, ensure that you do not confuse it with the diesel tank, and ensure that the cap for the diesel tank is closed in case the water tank overfills. Ensure that the anchor is ready on the bow if it's not permanently available. Some racing boats in particular may store them below. Check that your radar reflector is in place. Some boats have them permanently mounted. Some boats need to hoist them when it gets foggy, but always make sure that one is available. Finally, check that all of your crew are dressed appropriately. Remember, it may be glorious sunshine on the day, but if the water temperature is very cold, then life jackets are always advisable.